to the Arts Pavilion and to Abhayavajra's first, I think, one-man show.
For many decades.
For many decades.
I have had one before.
Have you?
Yeah.
When?
Back in the 1970s. Late 70s.
Before most of us were born.
It doesn't count.
Anyway, yeah, welcome everybody. That's really lovely that you could all come. That's really excellent. I hope you've had a chance already to look around the show. It's a very big show, isn't it? Fantastic that you can have a show as big as this. What I would like is for Abhayavajra's work to be much better known. Abhayavajra has been living in Suffolk at our retreat centre, the London Buddhist Centre's retreat centre in Suffolk, for 20 years, something like that. Yeah. Really, we wouldn't have that retreat centre without Abhayavajra. Abhayavajra went up to help when we first bought the property and was crucially involved in it. And then, he was basically the caretaker of the centre on his own for many, many years. I mean, it is pretty remarkable that you managed to do that. The London Buddhist Centre owes him a lot just by the fact that he was willing to be there for so long, looking after the retreat centre and welcoming it. And you remember we used to all come up and welcoming everybody and preparing everything. We've now got this wonderful new retreat centre, the purpose-built retreat centre, which I hope you visited. You might or might not, but it's really, really wonderful. And it meant that Abhayavajra could have an actual studio rather than a little room in a stable somewhere.
Yeah, there's a box in the barn.
There was a box in the barn until then. And we tend to now focus on the new Vajrasana, on this new building we've got and so forth. But the thing I wanted to say before we even touch on his work is how grateful I feel to you for all that you've done in looking after Vajrasana. Vajrasana's in my life, had a big effect in my life. It's had effects in many, many people's lives. You've really helped create conditions in which people can work with themselves. Hi there, come in. You've really helped foster those conditions. So, irrespective of painting, I think we've got a lot to thank you personally for all of your help. There should be like a Abhayavajra sort of public holiday or something to rejoice in you.
Everyone have a week off.
We'll come and see you at the trust.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking, I'm going to be asking Abhayavajra about the paintings, because that's what we're here to do. So the first thing I thought, and I've been looking at your paintings now for quite a while. We always come and visit the studio when I can, and even when you were in that barn, we'd always come round to visit the studio. And the first thing that I wanted to start with is this sort of question really: do you think of yourself as a late modernist? I'll say what I mean by that. The subject of the painting seems to be the very act of painting, which is a very late modernist sort of concern. They seem to even be about the brush mark itself. In my understanding of late modernism, it gets sort of taken back to what you've got is a flat surface and you've got a brush or some sort of implement, yeah? Before that, you've got this idea that the canvas is like a window looking through to the world, that what you're creating is an illusion that you can involve yourself in. Modernism, and late modern in particular, was saying, actually, no, you haven't. You've got a flat surface and you've got stuff called paint that you can put on. So how that stuff looks like, how it's applied, the relationship of the dimension of the canvas are kind of crucial to that project. So in your work particularly in these pieces behind us, this kind of emphasis again and again on the actual brush mark, and sort of stripping things back to the essentials of the actual brush mark on the flat surface. So I thought we'd start off by asking you a rather posh question: do you think of yourself as a late modernist?
Okay, not that often. I mean, I don't wake up in the middle of the night and think, I'm a postmodernist.
don't have dreams about late modern.
No. But it's an interesting question because I think there is something, if you like. I think in a way there's a certain dialectic relationship between that whole approach and philosophy and painting of postmodernism that you've described. And it's almost like I'm using that, but trying to use it to get to somewhere else. Let me. How would I sort of explain that a bit more simply?
Well, they don't just seem to be they're not like. They don't strike me as being like someone like Barnett Newman,
no, or
some of those other modernists where it was all about the making of the painting. There seems to be something else that you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I think. Certainly what I wanted, what I've always been interested in painting is what you've said. What you've got here is a flat surface. I think one of the crucial, essential mysteries and power of painting for me is always that a painting is never, it's never just what it is. So it is a flat surface, it is colour, it is paint on it. But it's got another dimension as well to it, always. And sometimes in art history, that dimension, as you said, is like a 3D illusion when you're looking through a window, etc. But I think certainly what in the painting that I've got here is if I've actually tried to, obviously very deliberately strip down to take this brush that makes this particular mark, take this quite limited range of colours, take this particular, size of proportion of rectangle, and just start doing something very, very simply, which is just repeating the brush mark, repeating the colours. But for me, what happens that starts to draw me into the painting, and I suppose I'd like to think would draw other people into it, is how quickly, how complex that can become. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that what immediately seems like, okay, so it's just brush marks on the canvas, starts to become something more complex, and eventually could be something a bit more mysterious. And I think a lot of that's to do with the way that the colours interact together in a way that you can't predict. I'd say, an example of that painting there, which we can see, in a way, there's, I can't remember, 4 or 5 different colours, but the same colour looks quite different against that dark area than it does against the paler grey. Mm-hmm. So there's, an interrelationship between the colours, and nothing is quite as it looks in the first place. Mm. So I think it's what I'm trying to explore is how things look different when you put them together in different ways, if you like. Mm. If that makes sense. So somehow I want it to look simple, straightforward. It is a flat canvas, but it's also there's something else there as well.
Hmm. And it'd be good to hear a bit about your influences. Like in that painting at the end, I can't remember what it's called, for instance, I really see the influence of Jasper Johns.
Yeah.
In some of them I do think I see a bit of the influence of people like Barnett Newman, those kind of... Hello, welcome, come in.
Is there enough seats?
Yeah. We can put some more seats out for you.
Put some more seats.
Some of them slightly got a tinge of Barnett Newman's zip paintings. De Kooning, I know, has been important to you, but if de Kooning is an influence, it's a very unusual influence because you don't allow yourself that sort of painterly splish-splosh that de Kooning does. I thought you might... Then other times I think I see a bit of Tiepolo here and there, particularly in the blues or so on. And I remember you doing your own very particular versions of Titian and Rubens, for instance. Yeah. So it might be quite good just to hear a bit about your influences, people whose work sort of feeds into this work.
Yeah. Well, I think in a way, all of that is being part of what I've looked at and been sort of, fascinated by and inspired by myself. And I suppose that's all gone in to make me, if you like, and my conditioning as a painter. And then, in a way, when I work, it's almost like I can see those things after the paintings happen myself. It's not sort of conscious, not that conscious, it's more intuitive. In a way, as I said, I'm setting myself quite a simple task of taking a certain number of colours, a certain sort of surface, and just start with a very simple process, of painting. And it seems when I do that, each painting just slowly develops into a different from the painting before. And then I myself can quite often see colour influences from somewhere, or so it's a bit more intuitive than deliberate, yeah. But I do recognise that there are certain things, going way back, I'd say Piero della Francesca.
Oh yes, I remember you saying.
What I realise more as I've got older is that actually I do respond to painting that has, very, very beautiful and very satisfying proportions into it, and a certain geometry to it, and a certain very subtle relationship of colour that draws you in. And you're right. I painted that painting and I thought, oh yeah, there's a bit Jasper Johns in that, but that wasn't what I was thinking of consciously when I started.
You weren't looking at Johns when you did that?
I wasn't looking at Johns when I was doing that, no. But I found myself doing something and recognising that, and how, and I assume that all I can say is that influence is quite intuitive and often unconscious. Yeah.
The other, just to go back to this sort of late modernist thing, the other thing that strikes me is that they are each painting is very much about the act of painting, and the brush mark, and like with these paintings you can't tell which is foreground and background, and so on. And the paintings, if you look at them, they change a lot depending on where you view them. So there are all these kind of formal things happening, I think. These paintings are these incredible. I find these really very, very beautiful. They really are just. They're almost like Liechtenstein brush marks, something in that side. In his kind of parody of the brush mark. But they're not. They don't seem to be purely to do with formal things. A lot of the paintings seem to want to have something coming through. I think that's called fragments, isn't it, at the bottom there? That gold coming through from that painting is a and that one marvellous kind of moment of sort of orange-brown. And I see that kind of instinct again and again of the appearance of a formal concern, based, in a deep sense of, art history and particularly, modernism, but then trying to use that for a new aim. I don't know whether you could. I don't know whether I'm right or whether you could say more about that.
That does make sense. I think actually those formal elements, and in a way they're setting up a simple procedure in a way to working. I think what happens for me when it works is that just doing that takes me and allows somehow something else to happen. Perhaps, most people, well, a lot of you probably meditate or Buddhists. It's a bit like, doing a mindfulness of breathing practice. You're just doing something very simple and repetitive, but that enables a certain, change of state of consciousness to take place, and then a new experience or a new level of experience arises in that. And I must say, it does feel a bit like that in the painting. There is something about the simplicity and the repetitive nature of it, but but always something usually new that I wasn't expecting exactly arises from it. The painting process itself draws me into it. So in a way I'm using those formal elements in the process of painting to actually allow something else to emerge, But that something else is something that, it's very difficult to put into words. But I could turn that round and say, I suppose, good painting is always, there's a mystery to it, as I said. It's something that isn't just what it is in physical sense. But at the same time, I'd like it to be very clear. It's like setting up something. You can see how I've done the painting, and yet you can't quite see how it's all come together. I don't want to do a lot of very high energy, splashy painting to try and create a sense of mystery or that there's some deeper meaning to it. I'm sort of using the processes of painting in the way you describe them in order to try and get to something that means something a bit deeper.
Let's go back a bit to that that word you said earlier, procedures, because that's one of the things that struck me when I talked to you about your paintings, that you definitely have these, they're like procedural limits, aren't they?
Yeah.
You have these amount of colours which you don't mix on the canvas, or you don't mix off the canvas.
Yeah.
You have this mark only, the sort of procedural limits, if you see what I mean. Like you've been using that kind of, I don't know what it's called, that rubber thing.
It's a little rubbery thing.
Yes, it's a little rubbery thing that you can take off paint with.
Yeah.
So some of the paintings, you have these brush marks, and you have this removal of paint. So, because some of the work is also to do with removing a layer and what happens then.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you should. Normally, painters try to get at it a bit more, sort of do it in a painterly way. You seem to be trying to do it in a procedural way almost, to try and make it as least tricksy as possible.
Yes.
And yet to come up with, like this painting that's close to us here, which I really like. There's something's going on. There's
yes.
And then there's something more. I think the interesting thing for me is that it is just what it is, and it's sort of more than what it is. It seems to be what you're trying to do.
Yep, that's what I'm trying to say as
right.
well.
That's my job.
And I do. I've done this with people. I've said, they say, "Oh no, they look like just various shades of grey." But then I'll take a dab of one of the colours and I'll put it against that, and they say, "Oh, no, it's orange actually. It's not grey." And oh, it's blue, and it's not grey. Obviously, two of them are grey. So it's the sort of changes, the transformation that takes place when you bring when you bring the different colours into relationship. So they all changed when I put them together, and then they changed again. Actually, what you might say is background is really the foreground.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm sort of playing a little bit with that. When I did that, the areas in between, they all changed again, and their relationship changed again. So, I mean, to my mind, that's all revealing. I'm not inventing it. It's revealing something about conditions and conditionality, and how one thing, you put one thing like us. You put us into one context, and we're one sort of person, put us in another context and maybe with someone else. So it's the I'm getting to it. Something about it's the unfixity and the mutability of things expressed in something that actually is quite fixed and static. But also there will be a lot of it's fixed. A painting is fixed and static, but there's also movement in it. So for me, there's quite a lot of things going on. So using very simple procedures, if you like, inverted commas, seem to me to much better reveal something much more meaningful about about everything really, but certainly about the way relationships happen, you know.
And are you using those procedures to get you out of the way?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that's the case, actually. Yeah. Yeah, I think my painting changed a lot, probably since I became a Buddhist, because I just felt I was able to get myself out of the way. I somehow knew how to do that a bit more. And I quite like that. And it gives me, in a way, it's a bit of a strange relationship with these paintings now, putting them up. It does feel, I know people say this, and so it might be a bit of a cliche, but it does feel like they're things that I've uncovered or found or discovered, rather than something I've kind of willfully constructed or made myself. I know they are that, but there is a certain feeling that they're saying something beyond just my subjective state in any one time.
It's interesting, because is that also for you, I think, there's something humble about that. You know, that there's something. It's almost like you've invented ways of getting around artistic pretensions or something like that to just give yourself procedural things, you know.
Yes. Yes. No, I think that's probably what does happen in the studio. I'm very happy just painting away in the studio. Once I start a painting, sometimes they don't work. More often than not, most of them seem to turn out okay these days. But I'm very happy I'm not angsting anymore about even what colours, you know, what sort of painting should this be? What am I trying to express? What colours should I use? Things seem to happen a lot more naturally, I suppose, and intuitively. And I suppose in a way I'm sitting just a little bit separate from that. But I think that allows something more, for me, more interesting to come out. And I'd relate that to other painters. I can think of other more recent abstract painters too. I'm very kind of interested in a minute. One's Bryce Marden, who came after like Jasper Johns and that, and the other's Sean Scully.
Yes, I was thinking about Sean Scully,
who it seems to me seem to have managed to do something similar, of having really, really simple formal elements in the painting and procedures, and yet when they put those formal elements together, something a little bit magical is happening actually. And you can't aim to do magic or do mystery, but it seems like it's there in reality. It's there in everything if you can just sort of just honour something, honour a sort of honesty and authenticity of approach, really.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that you know, that those procedural things, they free you from a sort of angst by the sound of it.
They do.
You know, and presumably magic only arrives in the absence of angst.
Yes.
You know, at least that might be one way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the other question is, the other thing that I always feel when I look at these paintings, I don't know whether you feel this when you've just been looking around, but they always, you end up with like, how does he do it? They're a bit like very, very subtle card tricks or something. Like the painting at the end there, which is one of my favourites. I can't remember what it's called.
Far and near?
Or near and far.
Or is it near and far? It's far and near.
It's far and near, there you go.
Helen did the sign.
I sat there, I mean, you know, I really enjoyed it. And you can't help wondering, how did he do it? Or in this one, you know, think, actually, how do you do that? You know, they're like sort of very subtle kind of card tricks in that way. Is that part of your, do you want that from the viewer? There's a slight op-art element, I suppose, is what I'm getting at, that it's kind of involving the viewer in how did you get to that? You know, not in the sense of how did you invent that, but what bit of paint am I looking at? Is that foreground? Is that put on first or second? Yeah. Is that scraped off, or is that put on? And if it's put on, how is it put on? Because I can't work it out, you know.
No, I wouldn't say that was deliberate.
Right.
It just seems to come out of what I enjoy. You know, it's almost like the play element in the painting, and quite often I'll I'll be doing something in the painting, and like in these ones, I suddenly decided to throw in another. I don't know why. I just thought, well, it'd be really interesting to throw in another sort of element into it, and that's when I sort of started just taking some of the paint away. And then I could say, oh, that's really interesting, both visually, but it's interesting because it's saying something about, for instance, well, all these paintings, the first coat that I'm putting on, even though it gets covered, is continually having its effect on whatever you do. So nothing's ever lost, if you like. I mean, particularly these paintings, and the paintings, all the paintings are done what's technically called wet into wet. So I need to paint them while the paint's still wet. So, if you can easily get into a mess if you're doing that, or you can easily get into something that's more sort of atmospheric and a bit vaguer. But I was interested in just what happens when the first colour you put on is continually, when you put another colour on, is continually slightly showing through. And that seems to me, when I look, I just think, well, that's something about, again, it's difficult not to sound a bit too pretentious or cliche, but it's saying something in Buddhist terms, saying something about conditionality in a way.
I mean, that's the obvious place to go, isn't it? Are these Buddhist paintings?
Yeah.
I was talking about the sense of something coming through, sometimes very overtly, sometimes not so much. For you, are they Buddhist paintings, and what on earth would that mean?
Yeah.
Apart from pictures of Buddhas and so on.
I've got a stock answer to that
Have
question.
you? That's good.
And as I always say, they're Buddhist paintings to the extent that I'm a Buddhist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
exactly
so that's
the
stock. That's the stock, which in fact is also possibly true, really, in another sense. Yeah. No, I decided some time ago that I wasn't going to be doing like painting actual Buddha figures. I think it's almost, but at the same time, my reading and reflection and the sort of relatively superficial experiences I've had of the nature of consciousness, of conditionality, etc. I start to see that sort of thing echoed in the painting, and in a way that's inevitable because everything, this table and and the camera and the chairs we're sitting on are actually revealing something about the nature of reality to us if we're open to it. Now, I think, the possibility in a painting is that it can do it a little bit more consciously. There's a bit more consciousness in a painting than there is a table. And that's come out just through, the process I've said. It's almost like a meditation process of doing the paintings.
It's interesting. What it makes me think is you can't make something meaningful.
No.
It's awful when people try something to be meaningful. It's usually terribly mannered and rather embarrassing. We've all done it, I'm sure. Trying to be meaningful, you're by definition not being meaningful. And it's almost like you're trying to apply that issue to paint, which is just working on the stuff, like writers work on the words.
Yes.
Rather than trying to put it onto the stuff, something that we might call meaning.
Yeah. And all I can say is that I can look at the paintings and I have my response to them. I mean, I can't dictate what anyone else's, what your response to them is. If you see something in them that conveys something, I can't quite dictate that. I can just try to apply myself to the process. I suppose you're coming back to what you're saying, to the process of the painting, with as much, not exactly rigour really, or even discipline, but with enough, it's like honouring the processes and honouring what paint does, and honouring the possibility of colours and how colours interrelate with each other. And if I can do that without, as you say, trying to impose anything on it, trying not for it to be meaningful or something, then what emerges is something that I just look at and I think, oh right, yeah, okay, that's sort of saying something, but not in words, you know. So I don't know how much sense I'm making in this, but
just occasionally though, you do seem to. There's an urge to find something transcendent in them, isn't there?
Yes.
I'm very struck by fragments at the bottom there. There's, it's slightly. There's an asp of a church-like nature to them. There's at times a kind of religious feeling to them in a certain sort of way.
Yes.
With others not so much, but with some of them, there's something else. It does seem a bit more of a kind of a steering towards that. I don't know whether that's.
Yes. Again, I'm not sure how conscious that is, but I had something of that feeling when I put this exhibition up, and just now, and yesterday as well, just looking at the work, and I thought, there's a sort of, I was quite pleased, I have to say. I thought, well, they're creating an atmosphere, and it's a quiet atmosphere. Darren, who was here yesterday helping me set up, the night before I'd gone with his daughter, who's extremely good painter actually, to a trendy young gallery exhibition, and he said there was bright coloured paintings everywhere, and they had loud music on, etc. It was full of young people just really enjoying themselves, and that's great. But when he described that evening, and he said, and then I came here, and this is just such a different atmosphere, and I hadn't really clocked that myself and I thought there is something, and I'm happy with that. I mean, I don't know if anyone else feels that, but it's almost like I got a sense myself, seeing all the work together, that there was something almost, a quietening sense. And I didn't want the lighting's not great in here, to be honest, but I didn't want it too bright. I realised if the work was too brightly lit, it was just like that, and if it was subtle, then I felt that there was more the possibility of feeling drawn in to the paintings, and I think I like that. The painting, like at the end, is actually quite a conscious thing of creating something that looks one way when you look at it from a distance, but as you move towards it, what you see from the distance starts to dissolve a bit, and then you realise as you get close that it isn't what you thought it was when you were looking from further away. So it's like that. As we pay closer attention to things, they change. We see more in them. But I must admit, I'm saying all this, and it's not like I had all that worked out before I did the painting. I might have had a vague sense of, I'd like to do something that changed in that way. But it just seemed to happen. Yeah,
I mean, that's where we'll start to sort of wind ourselves up now, but that's what has been striking me is, just how much, I mean, unless you worked in the studio, it's difficult to get a sense of how much of a challenge that is. Painters often will work all the time. Matisse used to overwork so much that his doctor had to prescribe the set hours for him to go to the studio. He could go then, he had to have lunch then, and then he had to finish then. He'd sit up all night drawing oak leaves and things like that. But being in the studio is many of Matisse's paintings are about the studio, and that's because it's a place of concentration. With that, it's easy to make it sound a bit romantic and a bit daft, really, because there are much greater concentrations than sitting in front of a painting. But the hours of work and the loneliness that can often go with that, and the sacrifices you have to make to do that, because you have to just keep being there, and you've been doing that for 20 years, pretty much. Certainly ever since you moved to Buddhism, like almost since day one, you set up a studio, and remember those first paintings of the field at the back, and we've seen iteration after iteration and new work coming out all this time. You finding more and more finding your own way, I think. They've moved around. They're more. I feel you're sort of more and more finding your own way. So I wanted to sort of finish by sort of, how have you managed to do that? You've had very little support in the sense of, interested by galleries and success. I don't know. It's very difficult to do any creative project alone without much sort of, I don't know. Often people work in a community of artists and so on. How have you managed to sort of stay at painting for so long, whilst doing other things like, being the caretaker at Vajrasana and producing the soya milk and the various other things that needed producing. But you just stayed with all that. You built your new studio. The Abhayavajra is also incredibly capable in terms of building. So you built your own studio. And how have you done it? And then why have you done it?
Why on earth? I don't know. I don't know. I just wanted to. I don't know. You'd have to. Probably a short thing. You could read my very, very brief biography of mine. I trained as an artist. I had all these ambitions. When I was young. That's a long time ago. It was going really well for a while. Then the wheels fell off a bit in my life, and I never quite understood what, if you like, why it all got derailed for me. I still don't quite, actually. But there was still something there then that sort of carried on with me, and it wasn't. And I stopped. I was really ill. I stopped painting. Came along to the London Buddhist Centre. Got involved completely at the London Buddhist Centre. We started the Gallery Cafe together before Vajrasana, didn't we?
Oh, yes.
And I worked there for 7 years, and then I went to Vajrasana. I think at some level, all that time, I was trying to find in myself and in my life how I could go back to painting, how I could marry or integrate my whole conditioning as an artist with my practice as a Buddhist. Yeah, I couldn't, and everyone has their own way of doing that. I couldn't see anyone else around who could possibly do that would quite fit me. I wasn't painting Buddhist images, etc. And I know others, have done that. Some of them here tonight, I know, in their different ways. But at some point, and I was struggling with that, all that when I started painting. When I got to Vajrasana, I started painting again because I had the space and a certain degree of time to do that. For over 10 years, I hadn't painted really at all. And then I started, and I did stuff, I don't know, this is no good, no, that's no good, that's no good. But something in me felt there must be an answer here somewhere. And bit by bit, I think the paintings, somehow, something about my Buddhist practice and my art conditioning started to come together a bit. And I think it was only... Well, I think this work is just from the last 4 years in the studio I've now got, when we've got the new Vajrasana up and running. And it feels like somehow that has actually come together. But it's like I didn't quite know how to do that. I didn't feel I wanted to paint, but I didn't feel I could find a way of painting that would integrate and I'd be happy with in terms of my Buddhist practice. And then when the new Vajrasana started, I had a decision to make. I could probably do, still at my age, I could probably do lots of fairly useful things. I could be teaching meditation, or I could be doing more at the retreat centre. I could doing things as an order member generally. Or I could decide to paint full time and then just simply see what happened and see how much of a Buddhist I was when it came to painting, or how Buddhist my painting was. And it just felt integrating to me. when I really got going, and this work is the sort of so far as it's got. So I don't know, does that answer the question? Yes.
Answered it very well.
Yeah. I think what I was searching for is that being able to quite genuinely bring those two aspects of my life together and integrate them. And I did decide it's worth trying that. I felt that, with Sangharakshita's and, Triratna's emphasis on the arts, if the arts were going to mean anything going forward, so I was thinking for a while, someone's got to do that. And I think it was Ratnagosha who said to me, I was saying this to him once, and he said, well, maybe you've got to do that. And all I could think was, okay, I've got to try. And that's really what I did, probably about, as you say, 10 years ago when I really got into it. And then it's sort of come together.
Well, that's great, thank you, Abhayavajra.
Yeah.
So we'll finish in a moment, but do spend time. This is just to sort of whet your appetite to the paintings. There's nothing that should get in the way of the actual experience of looking at a painting. And the paintings need quite a lot of looking, in my experience.
Yes, yeah, I think that's an important point. I've just sort of emphasised that. I felt more and more that it goes against a lot of contemporary grains, not all of them, but that I think good painting should really demand that you do spend time with it. And that's difficult for people, but I think in that way it is a bit analogous to meditation. Yeah.
So do invite your friends. Because Abhayavajra has been out there in South Africa, because that very unusual sort of life, you nearly had a big break, didn't you? And then you had a big break, but in a bad way, difficult. You got very, very ill.
Yeah.
And then you sort of set out this life. It's been very dedicated to all, but of course you haven't been in that scene very much. So do invite friends to come to look at the work. Also tomorrow night I'm going to be interviewing Hannah Lowe for Poetry East. So I'd recommend you come along to that. She's actually grew up in Ilford. She has a Jamaican father and a Jamaican Chinese father. So a lot of her poems are about growing up with a black father and what that was like in Ilford, and they're very, very touching poems about race and identity and so on. So do come along to that tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. But before you do that, do make sure you look more at Abhayavajra's paintings, and I'm sure he will talk to you more about them, should you buttonhole him.
And the exhibition's here till week tomorrow, till Saturday the 2nd, and it's open from 10:30 till 6. So, it'll probably be a quieter atmosphere to come and look at them if you want to come back, and I'll be around if you want to talk any more about it.
So if you're walking with friends, just bring them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give Abhayavajra a really good. So enjoy the art, as they say.
Yeah, I'll just say actually, because we're a bit short of furniture here, but there were chairs, we only had one table, so I've got some postcards and things, and they've got, some of the images, and they've got details on my website and Instagram on the back. Just feel free to take whatever you want from those. I'll put them on the table now we're finished. Yeah. Oh, and that somewhere there's some small posters. If there's anywhere you could put a poster up that advertises the exhibition, then please take one of those with you and see if you can get it put up in your wherever. Okay,
Good.
Thank you very much for coming.